The best way to explain mindfulness isn't by talking about it, it's by doing a little demonstration. But before we do that, what we're going to do is start off with a listening exercise. And you'll know afterwards, hopefully, why. And it's listening in a slightly different way. We're used to listening in the modern way, which is not necessarily always useful. There's a different way of listening to all sounds, but especially to the sound of the bell. And so the way to listen to the sound of the bell for this little exercise, you're probably better off closing your eyes so you can hear it better, but you don't have to. The next best option is to look down past the tip of your nose with your eyes half shut. And that's just so you don't get distracted by anything or anybody around you. And what I'll do is I'll sound this bell a few times. And the idea is to listen to the sound of the bell as it moves through time. So we're noticing the sound of the bell moving through time. So what you're noticing is a tiny little sliver of time following the sound of the bell. Just one more time. And this time, notice all of the other sounds. Sounds in the building, sounds outside the building. The sound of my voice. And notice the sound of my voice and all of these other sounds moving through time. And you're not trying to get anything out of this. So there's no instructions, no expectations. Just noticing sound. Moving through time. And then whenever you're ready, in your own time, just bring your attention back to your surroundings. So carry on noticing the sound moving through time. Notice the difference, how it feels. Do you notice the difference between noticing that sound moving through time and how you are normally? And the word that some people use is it's frictionless. And notice how it's different to everything else in life. Notice how there's friction. Now the thing is, once you've encountered that experience, all it gives you is the recognition of what you're looking for. It doesn't give you the training you need to be able to experience it at will. So that's the closest I've been able to get to being able to teach people the experience of mindfulness. And it isn't anything else, it isn't anything different to our normal lives. The only difference is you're in that tiny little present moment. And you know, science tells us how long it is, not very long. It's about 300 milliseconds. So the way that the brain works, it takes lots of information, what you can see here, smell, touch, taste, thoughts, emotions, and it bundles them all up into this 300 milliseconds is a third of a second. And we know that because, have you ever watched one of those videos where the people's audio and the video are out of sync? You only notice that if it's 300 milliseconds out of synchronization. If it's 250, your brain's doing a good job of taking all that information and synchronizing it into this tiny little present moment. I believe that that's where we're designed to live. And then what happens is technology and the economy and culture and all of the things that have happened in the last 10,000 years, they take us out of this environment where we spend a lot of time in that experience. And I'll tell you what use it is as well in a minute. It takes us out of that experience and it puts us here. And we lose that. So for many people, this is the experience that you can have when you're present or mindful in that moment. It's the same sort of experience, you know, sitting on top of a mountain, watching the birds circling the mountain and the stream pass. Nature draws us into the present moment, but what we need is some guy like me to come along with some bells and be able to explain it for you to get, and you know what it's like. You know it's like, it's the you're in nature and everything's okay feeling. We're in London and we're not in nature and everything isn't okay. And even if everything's okay with us, there's a lot of other people for who nothing's okay. So subsequently, there's this friction. And then we start to learn to cope with it when we're young, and then we're coping. And there's a whole load of ways to cope, and we all share them, but they just get us through to the next day. They don't get us back to experience, the experience of being human, which is all in the present moment. So we've got this experience called mindfulness. I define it as the undistracted awareness of the experience of the present moment. And there's distractions everywhere. So this is a confusing century for human beings. You can see it. It's all around us. But this experience of being present, mindfulness, is part of our legacy. We're all designed to experience this. This is why I do this. 95% of people, I say it's frictionless. It doesn't work with everybody, nothing does. But once we've experienced it, what use is it? Okay. Let's look at where it originated. Imagine two ancestors walking through the jungle back in the day of what they call megafauna. Here's a megafauna. It's a saber-toothed tiger, right? So you meet one, you're not going to come out on top. So you need to be aware, totally aware of your environment to survive. And on top of that, you've got, you know, smaller predators, you've got hostile competitors. There's venomous snakes, there's spiders, there's thorns a foot long, there's just about everything. All around you is a multitude of different sorts of danger. Right? And we only really have, as a rule, one danger in our lives in a city, and that's traffic. So once you've managed to, this is why you don't let kids out. Obviously there's hostile people, but they're the exception, fortunately for us. Generally it's traffic. So what you can do is you can switch your brain off because what you're doing is you're aware of traffic, you've delegated it subconsciously. You don't think about crossing the road, your body does it, just like if you're a driver, you don't think about driving. You don't think, all right, well now I'm going to put it into third. No, it just happens, doesn't it? So because of that, the brain can be used for other things. When you're in nature, you start using brain for other things and you are in a difficult place. So there's our ancestor walking through the jungle and he's thinking, oh, when I get back, I think I'll have a nice juicy mastodon steak, and then I'll take some of my extra mastodon steak over and I'll swap them for some berries that other guy got the other day, and then what we'll do is we'll get some of that stuff that you get when you ferment these fruits and you leave them there for a while, and we'll have a right old knees up. You're not going to survive. Your mind can't wander. It has to be plugged into nature. So that's the origin of mindfulness. So then the next question comes, well, what's the point of it in the modern environment? Surely we should be solving problems in our heads every single moment. Because it's such a complex environment, surely we need to think lots and lots and lots. And there's a common mistake there. What we're doing is we're prioritizing quantity over quality. So the thinking just becomes compulsive. And you'll notice that if you try to not think for a while. As a matter of fact, trying not to think is going to cause you to think. There's a famous experiment. Don't think about pink elephants. Really important. So important. The more important it is, you don't think about pink elephants, the more the mind will check. What it's doing, it's helping you out. It's checking to see if you're thinking about them. But of course, and so that's how our minds become full of what we call the autopilot, mind wandering. And in the East, the great meditation teachers, they have a name for it. They call it the monkey mind. It's the part of the mind that works against us. We would all ideally like to be able to control our thoughts and our behaviour and our emotions. But in actual fact, there appears to be this process working against us. So, getting back to mindfulness, if you notice that was a frictionless experience, so there's something that you can do there, some experience that you can have where the mind's calm. So it isn't about what it is, it's about what it isn't. You're calming down the mind, and the part of the mind that fills every waking moment with compulsive, repetitive, persistent thoughts, that's part of what the monkey mind does. It chatters. Monkeys chatter, 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 chatter. So how do we get from our day-to-day experience, get up in the morning, we're on autopilot, clean the teeth, have a shower, chatter is chattering away in the mind, we go through our day, we do what we do, we respond, somebody upsets us, we respond the way we respond. Generally it's with emotion because we're human. We don't get an opportunity to process that, we don't get an opportunity to intervene. Get to the end of the day and you feel like the day's happened to you and there's going to be another day that happens to you, and it gets repeated over and over again, and there's never any respite. We can't take a rest from the mind because it's there constantly. So what they did is 3,000 years ago, life in India wasn't much different to the way it is now. They had cities, they had town planning. They had town planning 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. The Indus Valley civilization, got roads, squares. And so what they did is they began to develop this mental training to help them to experience mindfulness. And of course, because although they were living in cities, the cities weren't 10 million people and you could walk out into nature, and many people had come from villages and lived in nature anyway. So they understood this and they realized what was happening, the mind's being drawn into this new environment, and from time to time we actually need to get back to our natural way of being, which is mindfulness. So they develop these practices called meditation. And so that's largely what I teach. I teach people mental training, and it's not just about gaining that experience of the present moment. It's also about helping us to process our trauma and adversity and anger and doubt and shame and guilt and sense of rejection from other people and feelings of isolation, and it can elevate our mood. The evidence is overwhelming. It can help us cope. It's not for everyone. It's a trial and error. There's all sorts of different practices. Some will work for you, some of them won't. You need to take the ones that work for you and just leave the rest, and maybe come back to them some other point in the future. So that, in a nutshell, is mindfulness.